Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughn Manor. And it is my epic comic book Wednesday today. Every Wednesday, I talk about a Marvel epic collection, and Steve Donoghue on his channel talks about that same Marvel epic collection. It is our world's finest team up, and today we're going to be talking about this epic collection. This is The Amazing Spider-Man, Volume 3, Spider-Man No More. This is a pretty important era in Spider-Man's existence. It might be the most important era of Spider-Man's existence. It might be. Of course, the creation of Spider-Man was pretty important. But this was the point in Spider-Man where Johnny Romita took over for Steve Ditko. Steve Ditko left the book and Johnny Romita took over. This epic collection takes place in the years 1966 through 1967. 1 year, I guess. It takes place 1966 through 1967. The Amazing Spider-Man issues number 39 through 52. The annuals 3 and 4, and a little extra in here, Not Brand Ek number 2, a little bit from that. That's a humor comic that was out back in the day. So yeah, Johnny Romita has taken over for Steve Ditko. Steve Ditko left grumpily. Stanley knew that this was going to happen. He knew that Ditko was unhappy. He figured that Ditko was going to leave. So he already figured out that he was going to get Johnny Romita to take over for Ditko. But he wanted to make sure that Johnny Romita was going to be the right guy for the job, so he had Johnny Romita work on Daredevil for a few issues, and Spider-Man just happened to show up in one of the Daredevil issues. And he did a heck of a job. John Romita is fantastic. His Spider-Man, the Spider-Man that he draws, or that he drew, was so beautiful, just so perfect, that everybody wanted to draw Spider-Man just like Johnny Romita for years and years and years afterwards. Johnny Romita's Spider-Man became what Spider-Man looked like, what Peter Parker was supposed to look like. It was that good. I mean, it was incredible. Johnny Romita, I think, was the greatest and most important artist on Spider-Man throughout the history of Spider-Man. Sorry, all you Todd McFarlane fans, but even he would say, I think, that Johnny Romita was the best. Now, the interesting thing is that, Stan Lee had his doubts in the beginning of this era because Spider-Man was a hit. And he knew part of the reason that Spider-Man was a hit was because of Steve Ditko. And so he was really worried when Steve Ditko left. He wanted Spider-Man to continue to be a hit. But he just, he wasn't sure that Spider-Man fans would accept a different artist. Especially since I think Johnny Romita's style is not at all like Steve Ditko's. But he is an incredibly good artist, and Stan Lee saw that. But what Stan Lee asked Johnny Romita to do, apparently, this is the story, this is what Stan Lee said, is he asked Johnny Romita to draw like Steve Ditko when he took over the book, for the first couple issues at least. And Stan Lee said, and he did it. He drew just like Steve Ditko. I don't think he drew just like Steve Ditko, but I can kind of see the effort there. So this, of course, is the incredible issue, number 39, a really important issue, because in this issue, the Green Goblin has figured out Peter Parker's secret identity. And we learn the Green Goblin's secret identity. I think it was either in this story or by the next story. I think it's at the end of this story. Yeah. it's the end of this story. So that is the first page that Johnny Romita drew of Spider-Man, and it is of the Green Goblin. And so his first few panels of Spider-Man are not super impressive. And you could take a look at that Peter Parker there. That is not the Peter Parker that we're used to from Johnny Romita. So I think this is Johnny Romita trying to kind of look like Steve Ditko, which must have been a difficult job for him. You kind of see that also in these kind of small, cramped panels, which aren't really Johnny Romita's thing. So the first few scenes of Spider-Man are pretty good, but they're not as great as they become. So the artwork on this is good, but it's not as good as the story itself. The story itself is pretty great, where the Green Goblin confronts Spider-Man as Peter Parker because he's figured out who Peter Parker is. And any of you who remember the first Spider-Man movie, I know it's been a long time, but in the first Spider-Man movie, they took that from that. And of course, it's Harry Osborn, who is, excuse me, it's Norman Osborn. Harry's his son. That's Norman Osborn, who is the Green Goblin. He reveals himself shockingly there, which was actually a surprise because we had seen Norman Osborn before. But we didn't know that he was the Green Goblin. The Green Goblin, who'd been around a while, his identity was a mystery up to this point. Green Goblin had been in a bunch of issues, and he was really a popular villain. He was a great villain, but we didn't know who he was. We finally learn who he is in the first Johnny Romita story. And there's Spider-Man saving the day. So from this point on, you're starting to see Johnny Romita be more like Johnny Romita. You still see a lot of kind of leftover look, a little bit of Steve Ditko there, but you know, look at Betty Brant there. That's pure Johnny Romita right there. And the battle between the Green Goblin and Spider-Man is pretty epic. Really great stuff. Very, very dramatic ending there, where of course Norman, gets brain damage and just can't remember anything. Who's Peter Parker? Who's Spider-Man? I completely forgot. He forgets that he was the Green Goblin. How convenient. And then things start ramping up when we get the Rhino. Spider-Man's rogues gallery is fantastic, and it doesn't get any worse from this point on. It just keeps being great. The Rhino, a fantastic villain, really dumb looking, but he's such a powerhouse. He's so dangerous. I mean, he's just practically indestructible. He can smash through anything. Spider-Man, as strong as he is, can sock him right in the face and not much happens. He's just a powerhouse, the Rhino. He looks like an idiot, but he's a pretty impressive villain. But, Spider-Man takes him out. But the really good stuff starts happening here in issue 42. Now, that is J. Jonah Jameson's son, John Jameson. Things go wrong with John Jameson. Now, John Jameson was an astronaut. He should never have become an astronaut because it leads to all kinds of problems, apparently, like becoming a man-wolf. Now, he doesn't become a man-wolf in this story. He just becomes a big superhero type of character who slowly goes crazy. But don't worry, it doesn't last. As you can see here, that's him getting super strong. They have to put this big suit on him because to kind of weigh him down just because he's so strong. And he decides, because his dad's always going on about how terrible Spider-Man is, he decides, you know what? Now I'm a super strong superhero. I'm going to go after that Spider-Man. And even his dad's like, I don't know, dude. Maybe don't do that. But he does. Meanwhile, the Rhino is still running around. we're getting some really good kind of continuity in Spider-Man, where subplots and everything else is just lasting issue after issue. And of course, he runs into John Jameson and has this great fight. Now, eventually, you still have some of the cramped panels, but it's starting to loosen up just a bit. Johnny Romita is starting to be Johnny Romita. I mean, look at Spider-Man on the wall there. That is a Johnny Romita Spider-Man right there. Of course, he takes him out, but this issue has one of the most important moments that ever happens in Spider-Man, and that's this, when Mary Jane Watson shows up on the scene. This panel is one of the most famous panels that's ever been in a comic book, let alone a Spider-Man comic book. Face it, Tiger, you hit the jackpot. Yeah, he did. I love his expression there. Damn! Yeah, that would be my expression too. Now, of course, his relationship with Mary Jane, it's kind of on again, off again. You know, he's just, at this point, where he used to be a nerd, Peter Parker, I mean, look at him now. Now Johnny Romita is totally, this is how Peter Parker looks from now on. Super handsome guy and smart. So he's handsome and smart, which makes him suddenly irresistible. All the women want him. And so, you know, he kind of juggles different love interests because he can, because he's super suave Peter Parker. He doesn't realize how suave he is, but he is, man. Because, like, you know, look at this guy. Gets all the girls, this one. So, yeah, Mary Jane, of course, becomes super important. Eventually, she becomes his main love interest, and eventually he marries him. Right? He marries her. Until Marvel Comics, years and years later, did the most cowardly thing that Marvel Comics ever did. Marvel Comics did two super incredibly cowardly things. And this is one of them. In that they suddenly decided that they shouldn't be married, Mary Jane and Peter Parker, and Mephisto, I think it was Mephisto that came and warped reality and made them unmarried so that they were never married. Marvel unmarried Mary Jane and Peter Parker, and it was a cowardly, stupid thing to do. Because one of the cool things about Spider-Man is he's one of the only superheroes that actually ages slowly. He ages slowly. But we've seen him grow from a teenager to a young man in college, to graduating college, to being an adult. And so and working in a lab, and then, I mean, we've seen him grow and become an adult Spider-Man. He actually ages, this guy. Like I said, slowly, but he does. And part of that is your life changes, your relationships change. Sometimes people get married. And instead of like having them have relationship troubles and divorce or whatever, I guess, they just made them completely unmarried, which was stupid and cowardly and upset me quite a bit. So yeah, and the other cowardly thing I'll talk about another day. It had to do with the Fantastic Four and canceling Fantastic Four. But I'll get into that later, at another date. So yeah, so at that point on, and that was a really important moment. And there were a couple of them. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, just want you to check out some of the incredible artwork here, because it gets really, really good. Got the lizard. The lizard shows up once again. But now Johnny Romita's doing it, so you've got lots of space on the page. The panels are getting a lot less cramped. The action is incredibly dynamic. I mean, look at that Spider-Man. Look how awesome he looks. Of course, everybody wanted to draw Spider-Man just that way forever. And of course, real world things happen, like, you know, Spider-Man, unlike a lot of superheroes, actually gets injured. And he actually gets injured. He has to put his arm in a brace just to make things tougher for him. Spider-Man occasionally gets ill. I mean, just things happen to Spider-Man that just don't seem to happen to other superheroes. And it just adds to the drama. Look at that battle scene. I mean, just look at the way those pages are laid out and the way the action just flows. And the action scenes just flow in such an incredible way, with Spider-Man fighting an incredibly strong supervillain with one hand. That's Spider-Man for you. And because it's Spider-Man, this just doesn't end in one issue. He goes on like that when he fights the Shocker. The Shocker's pretty cool looking too. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. We get a new Vulture shows up. Where's our new Vulture? There's the old Vulture. And we get a new, somewhat more dangerous Vulture, perhaps. Spider-Man. Look at Spider-Man's looking more heroic all the time. Now, eventually, we get to the story. If I could find it. I probably should have marked this stuff out. We do get the introduction of the Kingpin. The Kingpin is a huge guy. He gets even more huge in the future. But I'm looking for Spider-Man No More, that particular story. Hold on, I won't keep you in suspense long. Here we go. This is the story I was looking for because this is the title story, and it's one of the most important stories in this epic collection, Spider-Man No More. This is such an influential story that they took it and made it a part of Spider-Man 2. You guys, you might not remember that. That was a long time ago, Spider-Man 2. Had Dr. Octopus in it. It's a pretty good movie. It's probably the best Spider-Man movie. I mean, the guy that played Spider-Man, whatever his name was, I'm forgetting, he wasn't... None of the actors who played Spider-Man really seemed like Spider-Man to me. None of them. Not a one. Maybe someday they'll make a Spider-Man movie with a character that kind of seems like Spider-Man. But at least Peter Parker. None of those guys seemed like Peter Parker to me. Oh well, that's okay. So, Peter Parker, he's being hassled by J. Jonah Jameson some more, is talking about how terrible Spider-Man is. He's in college now, and he's behind in his classes. Everything's going bad for this guy. Aunt May, who gets sick every 5 minutes and somehow doesn't die, is sick again and still not dying. As you can see, his life is a mess. So much pressure. And of course, he starts to doubt himself. Being Spider-Man has brought me nothing but unhappiness. Which isn't actually true, but that's how he feels at the moment. In order to satisfy my craving for excitement, I've jeopardized everything that really matters. Aunt May, my friends, the girls in my life. The girls in this guy's life. He sure has it tough, this Peter Parker. And for what? As you can see, this is very Peter Parker here. He has many sulky moments, old Peter Parker. It's a very Peter Parker thing. And you can't blame him. He's got a lot going on in his life. The Flash never had this much trouble back in the Silver Age of comics. But Peter Parker, he does. So what's he do? He trashes his outfit in this iconic image of him just tossing his Spider-Man suit in the garbage, literally just throws it in the alley garbage and walks away. Screw you, Spider-Man identity. I'm done with being Spider-Man. Of course, someone finds the Spider-Man suit in the garbage because it just couldn't be somebody's fake Spider-Man suit. It has to be the real thing. And so somehow J. Jonah Jameson gets it because this kid finds it and goes on the talk show. Look, I finally drove away Spider-Man. It was all me, right? And Peter Parker's like, man, it's awesome. I'm kicking around. I don't have to be Spider-Man anymore. Look at me. I'm reading just like all those awesome people on BookTube. Well, that can't last, right? Eventually, he runs into somebody who gets into trouble. He has to beat them up as Peter Parker. You know, because these guys are mugging this old dude, so he has to take him on as Peter Parker because he doesn't got his Spider-Man suit. That was short-sighted. And then, of course, he has a flashback to his original story, but this time we get to see Spider-Man's origin as illustrated by Jazzy Johnny Romita. It's only 2 pages, but it's pretty awesome to see that. Uncle Ben dies yet again. He starts to remember, hey, That's why I became Spider-Man. So he goes and gets his suit back. Ticks off J. Jonah Jameson, and there he is. He's back as Spider-Man. And of course, he fights the Kingpin again. And the Kingpin is becoming pretty darn important. Of course, one of the most important characters in all of Marvel Comics ends up having to save J. Jonah Jameson from the Kingpin. Having to save that guy. So, some really, really awesome stuff in this issue. Those are the few, I guess these are the few characters in the Marvel Universe up there who are actually stronger than Spider-Man. There are only a few. There's Spider-Man down there. I guess Namor is actually stronger than Spider-Man. I didn't realize that. Doesn't seem right. So that was The Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man No More. Thank you for listening to me go on and on and on about how awesome Johnny Romita is. Stan Lee wrote all these stories, and they were still pretty good. This kicks off one of the most amazing eras in The Amazing Spider-Man. So yeah, Amazing Spider-Man. Spider-Man No More. Be sure to catch Steve Donoghue's video and see what he thinks about all this. I don't think he hates this one. I think he likes this stuff. We'll see. He surprised me before. But I'm pretty sure he likes this stuff, because if he doesn't, that would mean he's insane. But I'm pretty sure he does. So that was this week's Spider-Man No More. Catch me next week when we talk about this little fella called Thor. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.